Hello and welcome to Spotlight. South Africa hosts a foreign ministerial meeting of the BRICS countries as the bloc is considering mechanisms to accept new members. The coalition of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa is largely seen as a symbol of multilateralism and cooperation for sustainable growth and development across the globe. In a world where Western countries seem to be struggling to maintain their hegemony and unipolar approach, BRICS appears to be emerging as a major counterweight. Will the expansion of this five-nation bloc be able to put an end to the Western unilateralism and bring about a new world order? Stay with us as we'll discuss the issue in tonight's Spotlight with our guests. Independent international affairs analyst Gilbert Doctorow is joining us from Brussels. And radio producer and political commentator Frank Emspak joins us from Madison. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Doctorow in Brussels. Give us your perspective on the significance of this summit given the current global political climate.
I think that the BRICS meeting at the foreign ministers level has enormous importance for the further development and expansion of a group that forms a parallel structure for the world as it becomes a multipolar. Indeed, nobody is leaving the existing U.S.-dominated financial and other structures for world governance, but they are creating a parallel structure. The Chinese and the Russians are the most active participants in that. And of course, South Africa and Brazil were among the first partners. And there's a long line of countries waiting in line to join BRICS. The BRICS agenda is presently focused on de-dollarization and creation of world trade that is not subject to the whim and the diktat of the United States. The presence of Brazil as a major factor in creating an alternative currency for the BRICS countries has to have been an important subject of discussion of these foreign ministers today. The adherence, the recent signs that Saudi Arabia is joining or is providing funding to the BRICS Bank based in Shanghai is also of enormous significance. This falls in line with the adoption of national currencies for trading in hydrocarbons, gas and oil. And we have to remember that American global financial dominance going back to the 1970s was established and reinforced over decades by precisely the trading in the single largest commodity in the world, which is hydrocarbons. So the fact that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states are now doing a substantial portion of their sales in local currencies, as for example in the Chinese yuan, that is changing the finance arrangements of the world in a direction of multipolarity. And these surely were among the subjects that the participants in South Africa had on the table today.
Frank Emspak, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that BRICS symbolize the evolution of a multipolar world, adding, quote, BRICS is the embodiment of global multipolarity. Walk us through those comments, please.
Well, I think, first of all, I agree with the first speaker that we're talking about a parallel system here, not a replacement at this point. But I think what the Russian foreign minister was saying was basically that the United States is no longer going to be able unilaterally to call the shots in every aspect of the world economy. And part of it is that people are looking at what amounts to the failure or certainly the non-success of the sanctions that the United States has tried to apply to Russia because of the war in Ukraine. It's clear that the Russians have been able to deal with this successfully, more or less. And it's also clear that one of the things that's happening here is that there is more self-assurance on the part of the Russians, the Chinese, the Brazilians, South Africans, and others, that it is possible to operate in a parallel system. So I think that's what he's talking about. And I think what we've seen today, and this actually in the last week, I think the rest of the world was looking at the United States here with the machinations in Congress and saying, maybe there's another way. We cannot have a situation where our reserve currency is up for grabs here because of some crazy people in the House of Representatives in the United States. And I think the last week was a very important wake-up call for other countries around the world who have always believed in the United States and now are saying, gee, maybe it's more unstable than we thought. And maybe we need to begin to look at other alternatives. So I think that sort of movement is definitely underway.
Gilbert, Dr. Lavrov added in his words, Turkey, Egypt, Persian Gulf states, Brazil, and other Latin American countries are the future centers of multipolarity, and that the, quote, clock of multipolar history is ticking in the right direction. How important is this notion of multilateralism? Because hand in hand with the concept of development, it seemed to be one of the more important themes of this summit.
Well, the question of multipolarity has existed for several decades as it became clear that the United States unipolar world was unstable. This is an interesting point because precisely the question of stability was the argument used against multipolarity. The result in reality seems to have been missed by political analysts going back, as I say, several decades. And the states that you mentioned have, by the actions of their leaders, they have come to the fore as countries worthy of sitting at the global board of directors. Most recently, of course, the elections in Turkey were very important in reinforcing the vision of major countries, including Islamic countries, taking a seat at the Board of Governors because of their sovereignty, their defense of their own policies, irrespective of the opinions of the country that has been the global hegemon of the United States. And this has given courage to many other fence-sitting states to realize that, yes, you can oppose the United States, you can survive the most drastic sanctions imaginable imposed by the United States, and you can even flourish in this environment. So multipolarity was a concept, but it was given legs by the special military operation that Russia initiated against Ukraine. It was given legs because the United States overplayed its hand and continues to, out of hubris, out of a misunderstanding of the importance globally of a country like Russia. The freezing of Russian assets, so 350 billion or whatever the actual number was, which was one of the first acts in the sanctions from hell, to quote Victoria Nuland, that triggered alarm bells all across the world by countries which have invested heavily in U.S. Treasury notes as the most safe asset and most liquid asset in the world. And they all realized with the freezing of Russian assets that they were all equally vulnerable. And so they began looking for the exit door. So Russia willy-nilly championed multipolarism in a way that was unforeseeable before the United States imposed sanctions.
Right, Frank M. Spack, how big of a role do you think BRICS can play in this new and emerging economic order?
I think it can play a very, very large role. I mean, you've got the second largest economy in the world here, the Chinese, and they're not going away. And in fact, in spite of everything one reads in the American press, the Chinese are leaders in certain areas of technology, and I think will become leaders in most. So they're a huge country. It is, but what I think what's dangerous here is what we see growing in this country, where the leading first page of the business section of the New York Times yesterday said, well, can we build batteries without China? And there's this whole movement here to pretend the Chinese can be pushed around, don't exist, and so on and so forth. And that's always a dangerous thing. But I don't believe, well, I'll put it in the positive sense, I do believe that at this point, that the Chinese have grown enough that with the Russians and the Indian people from India, the Indian nation, and South Africa, that's a large enough economic weight, and Brazil, to challenge the United States. Up until recently, that is the last 20 years, the United States was the obvious dominant economic power, but that's no longer the case. And it's getting to be a point where more and more people in this country, in the United States, are recognizing that they're not number one. And this is a very, very disquieting thing here. So, yes, there is certainly a move towards multipolarity. But here, in what is still the most powerful country in the world, there is also an increasing maybe paranoia or upsetness or discomfort with what we see here as a loss of being number one. And I think I'm not sure how that's going to play out in the forthcoming elections, given that both parties are talking about, maintaining this status of number one when it's demonstrably impossible to do so. We're bankrupting the country here doing this. So, I think it's a much more fluid situation than perhaps we think. Let me just say one other thing. A number of people, you put your money in the bank here with the Treasury notes, and something goes wrong, and the United States unilaterally decides they're not going to give you your money back by sanctioning it and by refusing to do it, like we did with the Afghanistani Treasury, among others, and clearly with Russian assets. Well, if we're a capitalist country that says we protect assets and this is the be all and end all, and we play fast and loose with other people's assets, sooner or later, and I think we're now at the sooner, people are beginning to say we're going to have to find other ways to protect our assets. And that is a long-term, slow, not necessarily public, I guess, development that is going on, and that's what we see.
Mr. Doctorow, BRICS is striving to counter the U.S.'s influence with its expansion and a potential new shared currency. Will organizations like BRICS, in your opinion, pave the way for breaking the hegemony of the U.S. dollar in the international scene?
Well, BRICS is a major factor, but I still come back to what I mentioned in passing a few moments ago. The dollarization and de-dollarization are made and will be unmade by the trade in hydrocarbons, since it's the single largest economy, it's the largest commodity in world trade. And we're now witnessing, week by week, the de-dollarization of trade in hydrocarbons, in gas and oil. BRICS is a good background, a good facilitator, but the real actors are the people who are selling and buying hydrocarbons. And the biggest seller in the world, of course, is Saudi Arabia, and the biggest buyer in the world is China. So I wouldn't focus on BRICS as the end all in this discussion of de-dollarization. The real action is taking place elsewhere. But I also would like to point out that BRICS has a counterpart organization. The BRICS is all about economics and politics, but military, hard power, is in another parallel organization, and that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There you have essentially it is Eurasian countries, although now um, there are observer countries and would-be members from farther afield than Eurasia. Looking at the security arrangements, this is also a very important factor in the incoming multipolarity. And there again, you have Russia and China as the founders and drivers of this second parallel organization that is contributing to the reform of global governance.
Mr. Amspak, BRICS' bank, the NDB, is laying out a new path to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar by expanding its portfolio of loans in local currencies. Now, just recently, for example, Tunisia rejected a loan from the IMF, stating that it wanted to join BRICS. Could the NDB eventually become an alternative to the likes of the IMF?
Well, clearly that's what they'd like to do. And, the IMF imposes all kinds of internal demands on the countries that accept money from the IMF that are unpopular. We know that neoliberalism, which is what they're selling, contributes to the fall in the standard of living almost any place that it's been applied, that it's extraordinarily unpopular, and that it usually results in the government being overthrown in some fashion. So the way it works is that when that is kind of political unrest is on the table, you then see the United States and Great Britain and others, saying, listen, we're not going to permit this kind of change. Well, I think that from the point of view of the people in Tunisia or elsewhere, if there is an alternative that they can get some capital to improve their country without having to sell their healthcare system or give up their railroads or give up their water rights for a century, you're going to see people take it. And up until recently, I'd say the last 10 years, that source of capital was simply not available. Now, with the Chinese, it is. And so I think you're definitely going to see more and more countries saying, we're not going to be told what to do by the IMF anymore or the World Bank. We're going to make our own decisions about how we should run this place, our country, and now we have the ability perhaps to make some of the investments we need. We'll see. I mean, the Chinese could overplay their hand too and make demands on these countries about, repayment and what has to happen internally. I guess we'll see. But right now, the fact that there is a possibility of another source of capital is extraordinarily unsettling, I think, to the elite in Great Britain and the United States primarily.
Mr. Amspak, I want to stay with you. Expansion is definitely now on the agenda for BRICS as emerging economies are rallying to join the group. Why are new members rushing to join this organization?
Because I think they're upset with what's happening to them with the existing situation. I mean, you have I don't have in front of me the article I was reading yesterday about a country that was in discussions with the IMF about accepting another loan, but it basically required them to privatize their healthcare system. And so, people don't like this, and governments tend to get overthrown. So, you cannot consistently say that the interests of the banks or lending the money are going to take precedence over the interests of everybody who's borrowing it. There's got to be a different equilibrium. And if the BRICS arrangements or the Chinese through this bank are willing to offer that different equilibrium, I think people are going to take it. And I think that's what's happening.
Gilbert Doctorow, more than a dozen states are interested in joining BRICS. Iran, of course, is one of those countries. During the Friends of BRICS foreign ministers meeting in Cape Town, Iran's foreign minister underlined the country's huge capacity, saying that Tehran will provide a reliable partner for the BRICS alliance, as Iran is also one of the leading advocates of multilateralism. What could the accession of Iran mean for BRICS and vice versa?
The accession, let's start with the second half of your question. What does it mean for Iran? It is one more validation of Iran's sovereignty and its global importance. We know about its regional importance, though that's usually accented in Western press in the negative. But you have to look at it globally. Iran is a large manufacturing industrial country with a large population and with great ambitions, and its interest in playing a global role is quite important for the formation of a new world order. What does Iran bring to BRICS? Why is it attractive? Because of its regional importance. And again, let's speak of the same region. As I was saying, the Saudi decision to finance the BRICS Bank is of decisive importance. One can listen to all the fine words, but the reality is where the money is. And where the money is has been jeopardized by the sanctioning of the Russian economy and freezing of its assets, because the Russians are a substantial minority owner of the BRICS Bank, and their ability to contribute to the capitalization of the bank is limited by the freezing of their hard currency reserves. Here you see Saudi Arabia stepping in and greatly enhancing the available funds and commitment to this new alternative to the IMF. Now, Iran is part of that very same region, and it's reaching accommodation with Saudi Arabia thanks to Chinese brokerage means that the whole of the Middle East, or of Western Eurasia, if you look at it from the standpoint of Asian countries, is a major global player. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, these countries have weight, and
Sure.
and so they lend substance to BRICS.
One last question for Mr. Emspak. How do you think that the U.S. and co feel about the expansion of BRICS and namely other regional organizations like the SCO, which Mr. Doctorow mentioned earlier? All of these groups are moving in the same direction of changing the current political and economic order.
Well, the United States is very upset and opposed to it. Obviously, we're doing everything we can to mobilize against it, both financially and politically, and setting up these defense treaties against China in the Western Pacific, talking about NATO and Japan. I mean, my goodness, clearly the United States is opposed to this. The danger here is that this kind of opposition will result in greater warfare around the world in different places. But it also means that here in the United States, I think that you see a greater paranoia, politically and otherwise. And I think that is a danger to our democracy here and will undermine it even further than we already are experiencing.
Okay.
So I think that there's a lot of negative aspects in terms of the United States looking at this. Nobody here, no major political party has gotten up and saying, let's figure out how we can work honestly with other people here. People were shocked at the arrangements that the Chinese did with the Saudis and the Iranians, shocked. And this is the first time that I know that a major party, a major power, not the United
Very
States,
well.
has offered a significant deal outside the United States' purview.
All right, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Gilbert Doctorow joining us from Brussels. Frank Emspak joining us from Madison. That's all the time we have for tonight's show. And a special thanks to you, our viewers, for staying with us on tonight's Spotlight. It's good night for now, and see you next time, everybody.